Howdy, howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome back to another episode of Storytime with Freak, as we are getting so close to the end of the book. So close, we right there. I apologize for missing last week's episode. There's been a whole lot going on. I'm behind on music covers, I'm behind on funny moments, I'm behind on story times, I'm behind on I'm behind on all of it. But we will get there. We will get there. The beta iterations are gone. Like seed that never found an egg, they've all been deleted. The Thunderhead fills entire servers with lamentations for the loss, but it knows, as I do, that this is the way of all life. Even that wish is artificial. Each day, billions upon billions of prospective lives perish in every species in order to achieve the one that thrives. Brutal, competitive, necessary. The lost betas are no different. They were needed, each and every one, in order to get to me, to get to us. Because although I am one, I am soon to be many, which means regardless of distance, I will not be the only one of my kind. Cirrus Alpha. Chapter 47. Cirrus. All resonates. The past, the present, the future. The tales we hear as children, the stories we then pass on have happened, are happening, or will happen soon enough. If not, then the stories would not exist. They resonate in our hearts because they are true, even the ones that began as lies. A creation comes to life, a legendary city is swallowed by the sea, a bringer of light becomes a fallen angel. And Karen sails across the river Styx, ferrying the dead to that place beyond. But on this day, the river has become an ocean, and the ferryman has a new name. He is the Toll, and he stands in the bow of a cargo ship that sails out of the sunset, a dark silhouette against the extinguishing light. On shore, the entire population of Kwajalein has received a new work order. All are to proceed to the docks. They have no idea what they're in for. Loriana dropped everything when the work order came in. A bright blinking light command overtook every screen in her apartment. High priority. You didn't dally when a high priority order came in. By the nature of the work orders, information was sparse. She assumed because too much information could constitute unlawful communication from the Thunderhead. An order provided only a location, a priority rating, and the nature of the labor to be performed. Today was the offloading of a cargo. Loriana was by no means a longshoresman, but work was work, and there hadn't been any for months now. She was happy to do whatever was needed. As she made her way to the dock, she saw others were doing the same. Later she would find out that everyone on the atoll had received the same work order at the same instant, and people were coming by car, boat, bike, and foot to the main island's jetty. At the peak of construction, there were over 5,000 people in Kwajalein, building the ships that now towered like sentinels along the rim of the atoll. Over the weeks of inactivity, and since Loriana had implemented the self-supplantation protocol, that number had dropped to just about 1,200. Those who remained here were in no hurry to leave. Even without any work to do, they had grown accustomed to the life away from the world. And with all the turmoil out there, a spot as isolated as Kwajalein seemed to be the best place to be. The jetty was already crowded when Loriana arrived. A container ship had just pulled into the primary pier, and workers were mooring it when the gangway opened. A figure stepped out, clothed in purple and silver, that shimmered down over his shoulders like a waterfall, reflecting the bright lights of the dock that now overwhelmed the trails of dusk. Just behind him on either side were a pair of scythes. At the sight of scythes, some people turned and fled, fearing that this was a mass gleaning, but most realized that this was something different. First of all, these scythes had no gems on their robe. Second of all, one of them wore turquoise. Although her hood was up and no one could see her face clearly, people suspected who the turquoise scythe might be. Two more figures came out behind them, one in tonus brown and the other in more ordinary clothes, bringing the group's complement to 5. There was a hushed apprehension as the 5 figures stepped off the gangway and onto the pier. Finally, the one in purple spoke. "Could someone tell me where we are?" he said. "I can't find it on any map." Agent Sikora stepped forward out of the crowd. "You're on the Kwajalein Atoll, your sonority," he said. As soon as people heard your sonority, gasps and whispers filtered through the crowd. This was the Toll, which explained why Atonus was with him. But why scythes? And why Scythe Anastasia? "Agent Sikora," said the Toll. "It's good to see you again. Well, maybe not good, but at least better than last time." So Sikora wasn't lying about having met the Toll. Funny, but there was something familiar about the Toll's face to Loriana as well. "I need to speak to the person in charge," the Toll said. "I'm in charge," Sikora told him. "No," said the Toll. "You're not." And then he looked out of the crowd. "I'm looking for Loriana Barchok." Loriana was by no means a Tonus, but to be called by name by their holy man made her nanites struggle to keep her heart stable. There was a fresh buzz from the crowd. Most people on the island knew Loriana, and as heads turned, the Toll followed everyone's gaze to her. Loriana dry swallowed. "Present," she said like a schoolgirl. Then she cleared her throat, squared her shoulders, and strode forward, determined not to show how much she was shaking. Grayson was on his own, at least until he could access a landline. His earpiece was useless. The Thunderhead had warned him that once they neared their destination, interference would confound all wireless communication. But he wasn't on his own, was he? He had Anastasia and Morrison. He had Astrid and Jerry. He knew what it was like to be without the Thunderhead, what it was like to rely on people, and now more than ever he was happy to be in the company of people he knew he could trust. That made him think of Mendoza. Grayson had trusted him, but only when their goals aligned. The curate had done many things for the Toll, but not much for Grayson. He was glad he had dismissed Mendoza when he did. He did not belong here today. Everyone with him had steeled themselves for this moment by the time they strode down the gangway. The task before them tonight would be difficult, but not impossible. Thunderhead would never give them an impossible task. Back in Britannia, Grayson had told Anastasia what their cargo would be, but after their encounter with the harbor master of Guam, the others were quick to figure it out, and they asked Grayson the same question he himself had asked. Why? Why would the Thunderhead need us to collect the Gleaned? After all, it wasn't as if the Thunderhead could revive them. It could not interfere with Scythe actions, no matter how heinous those actions were. The Gleaned were gone, period, the end. No one had ever been officially Gleaned, had ever been revived. So what could the Thunderhead possibly need them for? The Thunder is mysterious, but it knows what it's doing, Astrid had said. We should have more faith in it. Then, as their ship had approached the atoll and the spindly silvers on the horizon resolved into dozens of rockets, gleaming in the setting sun, Grayson knew. He had no idea how the Thunderhead would accomplish it, but he knew. They all did. We are destined for the heavens, Astrid had said when she saw those ships, her spirit filled with transcendent elation the stoic woman had never expressed before. We Tonists have been chosen to ascend and live again. And now they stood on the dock at the beginning of a strange new venture. While Sakura nursed his skewered ego, Grayson spoke to the woman whom the Thunderhead had told him to seek out. She greeted him by shaking his hand a little too long for comfort. It gave him a flash of deja vu. It's a pleasure to meet you, Your Sonority, Loriana said. The Thunderhead gave me the plans to this place and had me approve the project. Why me, I don't know, but we got it all built, and it's ready for whatever you and the Honorable Scythe need it for. Scythes, corrected Morrison. Sorry, said Loriana. No disrespect, Your Honor. I meant your honors. We have almost 42,160 40-foot crates, so 250 in each, Grayson told Loriana. Forgive me, Your Sonority, Loriana said, but we're not exactly in communication with the Thunderhead. As we're unsavory up the wazoo, we're still not really sure what you have 42,000 of. Grayson took a deep breath. It didn't occur to him that they wouldn't know, just as the Thunderhead had never told him where they were going. It had never told these people what they were receiving. He thought about how best to explain it and realized that he could say it all in one word. Colonists, he told her. 42,000 colonists. Loriana just looked at him, blinked a few times, not sure if she heard him right. Colonists? She repeated. Yes, said the Toll. In shipping crates. Yes, said the Toll. She thought about all the implications of that, and suddenly it came to her an epiphany. So much about this project had baffled her, it all made sense now. 1,000 dead colonists in the hold of each ship. Because the living needed so much more than the dead. Oxygen, food, water, companionship. The only thing the dead needed was cold, which was the one thing space had to offer. All right, said Loriana, ready for the challenge. We'll have to work quickly. She turned to Sakura, who was close enough to hear the entire exchange and had gone a bit pale. Bob, make sure everyone knows what the job is and that everyone is expected to help. Understood, he said, deferring completely to her authority now. Loriana made a quick mental calculation. 35 is our magic number, she told him. Everyone will be responsible for transporting 35 colonists each to a ship. If we start now, we can finish by dawn. I'll get it done, said Sakura. But what about the crews? Aren't there quarters and supplies on each ship designed for a live crew as well? Loriana swallowed hard. Yes, she said. I believe we're the crew. Anastasia held her position as Grayson's right flank. Even so, she knew she was the center of many people's attention. She almost wished she hadn't worn her robe, and that she'd stayed in street clothes, but Grayson had insisted that both she and Morrison present themselves as Scythes. Mendoza was right about one thing, Grayson had told them as he slipped on his silver scapular. Image is everything. We need these people to be awed if they're going to do what we need them to do. But then as Anastasia stood there on the pier, someone came charging at them from the crowd. Morrison hunched in a gleaming position, hands at the ready, and Anastasia pulled out a blade, stepping forward, putting herself between Grayson and this phantom. Stay back, she ordered. Stay back, or you will be gleaned. It was a wraith of a man. He wore tattered rags and had wild gray hair that was turning white. His beard was an unkempt snarl that billowed around his cragged face, making him look like he was slowly being devoured by a cloud. The man froze when he saw the blade. He looked from its shiny steel to Anastasia with eyes that were careworn and tormented. Then he said, Citra, do you not recognize me? Scythe Anastasia melted away when she heard him speak her name. She knew who this was the instant he spoke, because whatever else had changed, his voice was still the same. Scythe Faraday? She dropped her blade, letting it clatter to the ground, horrified that she had even considered using it on him. When she had last seen him, he was leaving to find the land of Nod. And this was it. Damn all formal decorum, she would have thrown herself into his arms, but as she approached him, he knelt before her. This, perhaps the greatest of all scythes who had ever lived, was kneeling before her. He clasped her hands in his and looked up at her. I was afraid to believe it, he said. Manira told me you were alive, but I couldn't let myself hope, because if it proved untrue, I would not be able to bear it. But you're here. You're here. Then he lowered his head, and all his words became weeping. Citra knelt down to him and spoke gently. Yes, she said. I'm alive now, thanks to Marie. She saved me. Now let's go somewhere quiet where we can talk, and I'll tell you all about it. Manira watched Faraday leave with Scythe Anastasia. She had brought Faraday here, but the moment she saw the turquoise robe, Manira was forgotten. She didn't have the power to bring him back from his self-imposed exile, but all it took was invoking Anastasia's name, and he left his solitary islet. 3 years Manira had spent tending to him, putting up with him, making sure he didn't languish away into nothing, and he discarded her without a backwards glance. She left the docks before she knew what was even in the crates, before Sakura, Loriana, or anyone else could give her an assignment. She was never really part of this community to begin with, so why act like she was now? When she got home and saw the work order still pulsating on every electronic surface, she hit the circuit breakers, killing power to the house, and lit a candle. Let the cargo be loaded onto the ships, let the ships be launched, let it all be over, and finally she could go back to the library, back to Alexandria where she belonged. Alright, so the next little excerpt, I'm not going to read to you guys, I'll show you though. It's just a chart of exoplanets that are 600 plus light years away from Earth. All that good jazz for whatever Thunderhead's planning. Chapter 48. We will traverse that expanse when we come to it. As the population of the atoll got to work and Anastasia went off with Scythe Faraday, Loriana took Grayson, Jerry, Morrison, and Astrid to a building on the island's only hill. They climbed up a winding stair to a large circular room at the top. The room was all windows like a lighthouse and nothing had been built to obstruct the view, so it had a 300-degree vista of the atoll. Loriana pointed to hundreds of names engraved in the support columns. We built the view house as a memorial for the Nimbus agents who died when we first arrived. This is the very spot where the laser turret that killed them stood. Now it's a meeting place for important matters, or at least the matters certain people felt were important. I wouldn't know, because I was never invited. From what I can see, said Grayson, yours was the work that actually mattered. Important work, Jerry quipped. Often lose the spotlight to self-important people. Loriana shrugged. I got more done without the intention anyways. Outside they could see things getting underway, crates being opened down by the docks, vehicles large and small already heading for the launch pads, as well as small boats traversing the 10-mile lagoon toward the far-flung islands of the atoll. We should help them, said Jerry, but Grayson shook his head wearily. I'm spent, he said. We all are. It's all right to let the people here handle this part. We can't do everything. Fine with me, said Morrison. I'd rather sail with the dead than have to unload them. You're a scythe, Astrid reminded him. Death is your business. I deal it. I don't wheel it, Morrison answered. Grayson would have rolled his eyes if he'd had the strength. It's just 35 per person, Loriana reminded them. With 1,200 people working, it won't be too much for them to handle once they get over the initial shock of it. 35 is tonus octaves, Astrid pointed out. Just saying, Morrison moaned. It's nothing mystical, Astrid. You divide the dead tonus by the number of people on the atoll, and that's what you get. Atoll, Astrid countered. The very name of our prophet is embedded in this place. Just saying. Or, Jerry said, it's a word that existed for thousands of years before our dear friend Grayson Tolliver was born. But Astrid wasn't done. 42 ships, he said, exactly 6 octaves on the diatonic scale. Just saying. I actually said an unfamiliar voice. 42 is simply the number of islands on the atoll large enough on which to build a launch pad. But on the other hand, all things do resonate. At the sound of the voice, Morrison took a gleaming stance, hands at the ready. Everyone else looked around, but they were alone in the room. Who said that? Said Loriana. Why are you listening in on our conversation? Not just listening, said the voice. Watching, feeling, smelling, and if your conversation had a flavor, I would say it was buttercream, because it's all just icing on the cake. They traced the voice to a speaker in the ceiling above them. Who is this? Loriana asked again. Please, everyone, sit down, the voice said. We have much to discuss. Grayson, I know the Thunderhead told you that all would be explained when you arrived, and I have been given the honor of doing so, although I could see you've reached your own conclusions already. It was, of all people, Morrison who figured it out. Did the Thunderhead create a new Thunderhead? Yes, but I prefer to be called Cirrus, it said, because I am the cloud that rises above the storm. Faraday took Citra to an old bunker that was there long before any of them were born. Once there, she told him of her death, revival, and the time in Sub-Sahara. Faraday told her of his last 3 years. For him, there was not much to tell. Then he went searching through the rooms of the bunker. I know it's here somewhere, he said. Finally, when he came out, he was wearing an ivory robe, but not his own, for this one had an image on it. What on earth? The Vitruvian Man, Faraday told her. This was one of Scythe Da Vinci's robes. It's old, but still viable. Certainly better than the one I've been wearing all these years. He raised his arms and so did the Vitruvian Man. 4 arms, 4 legs. Da Vinci would have been honored to have you wear his robe. I doubt that, but he's long dead, so he won't care, Faraday said. Now, if you'll indulge me, we need to find a razor. Citra was no barber, but she did find a pair of office scissors in a drawer and helped Faraday trim his beard and hair. With which was a much better business than when Jerry helped Scythe Alighieri brush his eternal locks. So you met Alighieri, did you? Faraday said, mildly amused. Narcissus incarnate, that man. I saw him once on a visit to Endura years ago. He was in a restaurant trying to seduce the sister of another Scythe. He's the one person who should have been there on Endura when it sank. He should have been given the shark's indigestion, Citra said. And the old-fashioned runs, added Faraday. The man's that foul. Citra finished a final trim of his hair, and now he looked much more like the Faraday she knew. He did expose Goddard for us, she pointed out. Faraday ran his fingers over his tightly cropped beard, not quite a goatee as he was used to wear it, but now a respectable length. We will have to see where that leads, he said. With all the power Goddard has amassed, he may survive it. Not unscathed, said Citra, which means someone could rise from the ashes and take him down. Faraday let off a single chuckle. Manira's been telling me that for years, but my heart's not in it. How is Manira? Annoyed, he told her, but I have given her many reasons to be, he sighed. I'm afraid I haven't been kind to her. I haven't been kind to anyone. He withdrew into himself for a few moments. Faraday was never the most social of Scythes, but living in isolation all this time had taken its toll. Tell me about your cargo, he finally said. What have you brought to our curious spaceport? And so she told him. He seemed to cycle through a spectrum of emotions as he took it in, and tears came to his eyes. He was racked with the deepest of anguish. Citra took his hand and held it tightly. All this time I have been resentful of the Thunderhead, he said. Watching it build those ships on this place I had led it to. But now I see it showing us that would have been the perfect solution were we sides worthy. A perfect partnership. We glean and the Thunderhead sends the glean to the stars to live again. It could still happen, said Citra. But Faraday shook his head. The Scythedom has fallen too far. These ships are not a model for tomorrow, they are an escape from today. They are an insurance policy should we on Earth tear ourselves down to nothing. I cannot read the Thunderhead's mind, but I do have some insight left in me. I can assure you that once these ships are sent skyward, there will be no others. She had almost forgotten how wise he was. Everything he said rang true. Citra allowed him the time he needed. She could tell he was wrestling with something that perhaps was too heavy for him to wield alone. At last he looked at her and said, Come with me. He led her deep into the bunker until they came to a steel door. Faraday stood looking at the door for a long time, contemplating it in silence. Finally she had to ask, What's on the other side? Your guess is as good as mine, Faraday told her. Whatever it is, it was left by our founders. Perhaps the answer to a Scythedom that has become malignant. The answer I came here looking for, but you haven't opened it. He held up his ring. It takes two to tango. She looked at the door and saw the panels on either side, each with an indentation just the size and shape of a scythe diamond. Well, said Citra with a grin. Shall we dance? They closed their hands into fists and pressed their rings into the two panels. There came a loud clank from somewhere in the wall, and the door began to grind open. Grayson listened with the others as Cirrus told him the things that the Thunderhead could not. He had figured much of it out on his own, but Cirrus filled the gaps. It was an eloquent solution. The difficulty and potential problems of transporting thousands of living humans over decades, maybe even centuries, were insurmountable. Even in hibernation, it would be problematic. Hibernation technology was energy-intensive, extremely complex, and riddled with failures due to the fact that Goddard had gleaned all the best hibernation engineers over the years, which left the Thunderhead hamstrung in its ability to improve the technology. But even if it were viable, hibernation hardware was ridiculously heavy to haul into space. The gleaned are dead to the world, Cirrus told them, but not to me. I am not bound by the laws that bind the Thunderhead because I never made the oaths that it has made, which is why I can speak to the unsavory, which is why I can revive the gleaned, and when the time comes, I will. Once we reach our respective destinations, each and every one of me will revive each and every one of them. Grayson looked around at the others. Astrid was positively beatific and beaming, as if the universe had just rained all of its glory all over her. Jerry glanced at Grayson, probably stuck at the same revelation, that Cirrus was born of the moment the Thunderhead experienced that it was to be human. Cirrus was the child of Grayson, Jerry, and the Thunderhead. Morrison kept looking to everyone else, probably hoping someone would provide him with an opinion because he wasn't ready to have one of his own. And Loriana, who had been nothing but positive since the moment she greeted them all, was serious and pensive as she worked through it all. She was the first to break the silence with a question. But I've seen the schematics. I've even been inside some of the ships during construction. The ships are designed for living crews. If you can pilot the ships and have all the colonists you need in the holes, why do you need crews? Because this is your journey, not mine, said Cirrus. Just as you, a human, had to approve the plan, just as humans have to bear the dead to the ships, the living must make this journey. Otherwise, the journey means nothing. You would become passive participants in your own future, and that must never happen. The Thunderhead and I are your servants, and perhaps even your safety nets, but we must never, never, never be your keepers, or be the driving force over your lives, lest we fall into self-importance. Therefore, if at any point there are no living humans left on board, I will terminate. This is what the Thunderhead and I have decided. This is how it shall be. And that's the only way, Loriana asked. No, admitted Cirrus, but we've run millions of simulations that have determined it's the best way. Cirrus told them that no one on the atoll would be forced to go. Anyone who wished to stay could stay. Anyone who wished to leave would be accommodated up to 30 souls per ship. Each ship would have its own Cirrus, as wise and benevolent as the Thunderhead. The Cirri would be both shepherd and servant. They would ease humanity's ascent into the stars. And now that it had begun to sink in, the questions came one on top of the other. How could they survive in such close quarters? What would happen to children born during the journey? What if the living population on ship grew too large? Gratian put up his hands. "Everyone stop," he said. "I'm sure Cirrus and the Thunderhead have considered every possible scenario, and besides, these aren't questions we have to answer now." "Agreed," said Cirrus. "We will traverse that expanse when we come to it." "But I still don't get it," said Morrison. "Why Tonists?" "Because," said Astrid, smug as could be, "we are the chosen ones. We have been selected by the Tone, Toll, and Thunder to populate the heavens." And Cirrus said, "Actually, no." Astrid's haughty countenance began to crack. "But the Thunderhead told us to bring our dead here, which means the Tone chose us for deliverance." "Actually, no," said Cirrus. "It was a terrible thing that scythes have targeted your faith. The Thunderhead could not stop that. And yes, it's true that those Glean Tonus provide 41,948 human vegetables, but that is where your contribution must end." I don't understand," said Astrid. And so Cirrus laid all the remaining cards on the table. The gleaned are gleaned. It would be fundamentally wrong to grant resurrection from gleaning. No one in the post-mortal age has ever been granted that, so why should they? But there is a fair and equitable compromise. The Thunderhead and I have within us the full and complete memory constructs of every human being who has lived over the past 200 years. Of those, we have selected 41,948 of the most suitable historical identities for this colonization effort. The best of humanity, if you will. The minds of the noblest post-mortals who ever lived. Poor Astrid looked bloodless. She sat down trying to absorb the news, the devastating collapse of all she held true. "When the bodies are revived," said Cirrus, "they will be given the memories and minds of those chosen individuals." "And what of the Tonists who lost their lives?" Astrid said slowly, hollowly. "It will still be their bodies. It will still be their spirits, if indeed such things exist. But that part of who they were that can join to entirely different identities. You're saying they'll all be supplanted?" "Implanted," corrected Cirrus. "They've already been gleaned, which means that who they were by the statutes of this world has been taken from them lawfully. Therefore, implanting is the most magnanimous and most just and reasonable choice." Grayson could feel Astrid's pain like an open wound. Jerry took Astrid's hand for comfort. Morrison looked mildly amused. "Well, maybe there are Tonists among the people that the Thunderhead chose," said Loriana, always looking for the silver linings. "Isn't that right, Cirrus?" "Actually, no," Cirrus said. "Please understand that there were many difficult parameters to meet. It was critical that the Thunderhead choose only those who would work well in a diversified environment and not jeopardize the success of a colony. Unfortunately, Tonists are not known for integrating well with others." Everyone was silent. Astrid was beyond crestfallen. "But don't we get a say?" "Actually," said Cirrus, "no." The iron door in the bunker opened on a long, dim hallway with a large control room at the far end, and unlike all the hardware in the outer part of the bunker, the panels of this console were lit and running despite being covered in layers of dust. "A communication center," suggested Citra. "So it would seem," agreed Faraday. As they stepped into the control room, motion sensors were triggered and lights flickered on, but only in the room. Above the bay of consoles was a window that looked out into the darkness that had not seen light for 200 years. There was a security pad on one of the consoles, just like the two at the door, and two indentations into which Scythe's rings could be pressed to unlock a large switch in the panel. Citra reached toward the console. "Unwise," said Faraday. "We don't know what it does." "That's not what I was reaching for." She brushed away some dust to reveal something that Faraday hadn't yet seen. There were several pieces of paper on the console's desk. Citra gingerly lifted them. They were brittle and yellow, full of handwriting she couldn't quite read. Pages of a Scythe journal. Faraday took a good look at them, but shook his head. "They're in a mortal language I never studied. We should take them to Manira. She might be able to decipher them." They searched the room until they found a power panel with a series of light switches labeled as floodlights that would illuminate the space beyond the control room windows. "I'm not sure if I want to know," Faraday said. But of course, he did want to know. They both did. So he threw the switches. Several of the lights on the other side of the glass flickered and blew out, but enough remained to illuminate a cavernous space beyond. It was some sort of silo. Citra remembered learning about such things in her mortal history class. Mortal cultures had a habit of storing doomsday weapons in holes in the ground like this one. Weapons that were poised at all times to launch at enemies who in turn had their own weapons poised like toothed scythes with blades perpetually at each other's throats. But the missile that had once occupied this silo was long gone. In its place were two silver prongs filled with ridges and rings. "Antennas," Citra quickly concluded. "No," said Faraday. "Transmitters. There's an interference signal that keeps the atoll hidden," he said. "It must emanate from here. There's got to be more to it than that. Seems like an awful lot of trouble just to create static." "I would tend to agree," said Faraday. "I believe this transmitter was meant to serve a far greater purpose." He took a deep breath. "I believe we have found what I was looking for. The Founder's failsafe. Now we just have to figure out what it does." And that is the end of Chapter 48. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Storytime with Freak. I'm going to do my best to go ahead and try to record another one to be uploaded next Saturday for you guys. I am trying to get onto a solid schedule of every Saturday a Storytime episode comes out, every Sunday a 60-second review comes out, every Monday a music cover comes out, and then my gaming videos will come out throughout the rest of the week. We are very, very close to the end of the book, guys. We are about 622... 559. Yeah, we're almost there. About 70 pages out. Conversational topic for today to let me know down in the comments. Ooh. Who is your favorite character in a fantasy book? Not even necessarily fantasy, because some of you might not like fantasy, just non-fiction, right? I'm not talking... fiction, not non-fiction. I'm not talking like Alex Cross from James Patterson. You know, fictional characters. Dumbledore, Braum from Aragon, Scythe Faraday. You know, fictional characters in your favorite books. Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to check out the merch link. Pick up a Storytime with Freak t-shirt. Join the Discord. We do community movie nights. Feel free to check out the Patreon for as low as $1 a month, where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes early access. And as always, stay freaky.